Hello?
All right, good to go.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, the next talk is going to be about hardware security. And just give me a minute. We have Shashank Kulkarni here. He's a senior embedded solutions engineer, and he works with Microchip Technology Inc. in India. And Shashank holds a bachelor degree in electronics and instrumentation from BITS Pilani. With his specialization in embedded security, Shashank enables the architecture for scalable systems. And we welcome Shashank here to talk about hardware security because that's one of the most hottest topics today. Because as we are seeing, the number of digital transactions we are doing is increasing, and theft of any of our personal information is actually going to be a challenge for us. And so, let's see what Shashank says that and how he is enabling such a way that we are all protected well.
Thank you. All right, I realize this session separates you from the lovely Bangalore traffic, so I'll try to make it worth your while. Thank you for staying back. Let me talk about the topic today. I know we are at DVCon. This has nothing to do with the D or B of DV. Okay. Think of your interconnects, your buses. You zoom out, you get your IC die. You zoom out, you get a packaged IC. You zoom out, you get some kind of a, let's say, power block or communication block. You zoom out, you have an entire product. Let's say a Wi-Fi router or whatever it is. You put plastics on it. You need someone to sell it. I'm part of a team in Microchip that sells ICs. I'm the applications part of it. So once someone chooses our IC, people like me go and sit and work with our clients, get their feedback, write software with them, debug their hardware with them, crack a few jokes about our companies, and then we get the revenue back. This revenue gets pumped back into a lot of what you guys do at your companies. So that's how the overall cycle looks like. I'll be talking today about hardware security. So other than my regular job of, what I talked about selling ICs, I also lead Microchip security function group for the Asia region. So the India, ANZ, ASEAN region, Japan, Korea. I service a lot of security products as an end function. And as Babu said, security has become extremely critical and embedded systems are no stranger to that requirement. Let's take a look at what is driving embedded security requirements nowadays. At any point of time, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. I don't think we would be occupying the entire 45 minutes, and I know you're not eager to step into the traffic, so might as well ask questions. All right, number one, extremely important driver for security nowadays is brand and IP protection. How many of you here trust a brand implicitly? Let's take an example. Let's say home inverters. How many of you have home inverters at your homes? Would you choose any home inverter or would you go for a particular brand? If yes, why? There is this trust that comes, right? The implicit trust. What makes that trust? Quality. And what makes quality? IP. So a lot of companies today, they understand that everything that they do, even any other company can do. So IP protection is becoming a big driver for adding security into the systems. Second is a sheer increase in the number of attacks, and we are all to blame for it. We needed Bluetooth controlled lights, we needed Wi-Fi controlled pumps, we needed the chair to go back when you step into the car. This is what we invited. A lot of attacks are happening, especially in the automotive and industrial sector. Standards and legislations. This is not something that's a driver in an isolated way. It's perhaps a result of a lot of things that are happening around us. A number of countries and regions are passing standards and passing laws and making implementation of security compulsory. End customer privacy requirements, again, a very hot topic. How many of you have heard of GDPR? How many of you know that something like GDPR is driving the way an electricity meter is designed? Surprised? Yes, this is happening. GDPR is changing the way a wireless smoke sensor, an electricity meter, a water meter is being designed across the world. The key component that changes is the security in the system. And logistics and identity management. How many of you order stuff online? Haha, why is that even a question? Would you like it if people come to know what you're buying? I know I won't, but I don't know about you. So the thing is, identity tracking online in logistics has become extremely important because efficiency is now becoming important, right? Okay, so with that in mind, I want to now talk about a few macro trends. Again, as I said, nothing related to specific DV technologies. How many of you have a smartphone? Everyone. How many of you have a charger for your smartphone? Everyone. How many of you have a wireless charger for your smartphone? Or tablet? Or your Kindle? One. So what is the reason? Anyone just shout it out loud. Why don't you have a wireless charger? Of course, cost is one. Second is, not everyone makes a good wireless charger. The principle itself is very common. The market is full of knockoffs. I wouldn't want my phone to burst out in flames, right? So there is an organization called the WPC, the Wireless Power Consortium, that defines a spec called QI, QI. For some weird reason pronounced as Qi. So Qi adds authentication. The folks at WPC think of a world where a person gets up from the bed, picks up his phone from a wireless charging mat, goes into his car, places the phone on the wireless charging mat in the car. He's in the mood for a coffee, he or she is in the mood for a coffee, goes to a Starbucks, keeps the phone on the charging mat there, takes the phone back, goes to office. While everyone is in a meeting, they let their phones charge on a wireless charging mat. That's the world that WPC envisages, but they are also aware of the risks. The risks are of safety. Not all wireless chargers are built equal. A number of phones have exploded worldwide because of bad wireless chargers around them. The overall user experience is something that has to be enhanced for people to even trust it, right? You would not buy the world's best wireless charger if it involves, keeping the phone only in a certain orientation and keeping it for only X number of minutes, right? So the user experience also becomes important. The need for trust. Trust is very, very important. And how do we do all of this? By adding authentication. How do you add authentication? By adding a security. You can do a software, you can do a hardware. WPC mandates hardware, by the way, which is also the topic for the day. So this is one of the biggest trends right now, which is influencing hardware security designs across the globe, including those in India. You may not know this, but India is home to a lot of buzzing activity in automotive right now, thanks to electric vehicles and the Qi spec. Second, how many of you here own an EV? Any EV, an Ather, an Ola? Yeah, few of us? Oh yeah, more than few of us, okay. The thing is, EVs are taking off. India is perhaps driving the whole thing across the globe due to the sheer number of volumes we have, and also for a change, the will of the, the ruling government. The thing is, EVs themselves are fraught with a lot of dangers because, again, it's possible to connect n number of chargers to your EV. If every company starts coming out with their unique chargers, we have a problem because you would end up with a lot of e-waste. The way to streamline that is by having a common spec. But then how do you ensure that the spec is implemented correctly? Well, one of the ways to protect at least the financial fraud aspect of it is by having a unique identity given to each and every vehicle and to each and every charger. So think of the charger and the vehicle saying, hi, hello, I am so-and-so, I belong to so-and-so, I am deployed in so-and-so, I was manufactured by so-and-so. By the way, my firmware version is X.Y. Do I have a new firmware version? Oh no, let me start my power delivery. And at the end of the power delivery, hey, by the way, this is how much money you have to pay, right? This is what a typical EV transaction looks like. We have a well-defined spec in place, but the problem is here. The problem is with the storage of the private key. As I said, each entity is supposed to have its own identity. In the cryptographic world, an identity is nothing but a private key. In an old implementation, it could have been a symmetric key, but we don't do symmetric keys today. It's private keys and public keys only. And the ISO 15118, which is a driving spec for EV charging subsystems, It says that ideally you can have all kinds of protections in the EVCC, microcontroller, blah, blah, blah. But they talk about having an HSM. 15 years back, would someone have talked about having HSMs on something like a charger? No, a wireless charger for a phone or anything. No, but today's needs mandate that. So they talk about how a suitable HSM would provide a secure environment for private key and so and so. Now, can someone take a guess as to how many EVs are supposed to be on road by the year 2025 or so? Any random guess? Okay, would it be in tens of thousands or would it be in lakhs? Lakhs. Now, for lakhs of EVs, how many chargers do you think there would be? At least tens of thousands if we consider that we are all using community chargers and so on. So imagine tens of thousands of charger means tens of thousands of private keys. The way hackers look at it, these are tens of thousands of attack surfaces for them, right? So this is being addressed very, very aggressively in the industry. Again, a very big macro trend driving the growth of embedded security. Right, so this basically just summarizes the ISO 15118 recommends the use of secure key storage. Due to diplomatic restrictions, no one can say you have to use it, but we see almost every client, especially in India, using a hardware security in their system. Let's talk a little bit about industrial. So we talked about two macro trends in automotive, the Qi and the ISO 15118. The industry, how many of you have heard of something called the Industry 4.0? You may have friends or relatives working in some company where they come home and say, man, Industry 4.0 is catching on. How many have heard of the term IIoT? I know it sounds fancy. In fact, IoT sounds fancy. I'll come to it separately when we talk. All right. So the trends influencing industrial security, especially exacerbated by the pandemic, are the fact that there is a sheer number of connectivity being added. A typical PLC or a SCADA system, let's say you take a Siemens system or whatever it is, it contains a lot of connectivity. It has always done that. You have always had sensors. But these sensors would, run a long cable sending a 4 to 20 milliamp signal indicating the temperature was so and so. Now we have people looking at converting these into Zigbee sensors. How many of you know about Zigbee? Right, so Zigbee is now becoming popular. Folks who used to do Zigbee are now looking at doing BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy. Why? So that someone does not need to enter a boiler to do something. They could simply get an update and walk away from there. We are now seeing with the advent of Wi-Fi mesh, Wi-Fi connectivity being added to sensors. Something that's just supposed to tell the temperature is now a full-blown Wi-Fi node. And there are thousands of these in an average plant. If you look at a thermal power plant, let's say, go to any factory, there are thousands of these sensors. They are now being connected through Wi-Fi or something. More usage. Can someone tell why industries are now seeing more usage than ever? Right? One trend is definitely now everyone wants data. Earlier, the temperature sensor used to just show the temperature. Now people are logging the temperature. People are doing preventive maintenance. People are looking at what this data could mean for me 2 years down the line, what it could mean for my insurance guy, who probably knows that the sensor was going bad, but you did nothing about it. Data is one. Second is efficiency. We see a lot of old practices being replaced by newer data-backed practices. There are MBAs who get hired to do this. They tell that we need a sensor for this, we need a sensor for that. We need to know if the assumption we made is true, right? And industries are the most fertile place to do that, and that is happening now. More third-party software, More third-party software. So consider the fact that a lot of connectivity stacks are being added. Do you think the company that is good at making boilers or temperature sensors would also be great at doing communication stacks? No, right? Does a company that makes great processors do all of the IP themselves? No, right? It's the same case. So they do outsource a lot of stuff, a lot of third-party software comes in. Sometimes the third-party software is not as good, and that leads to a lot of attacks. And this is a modern-day reality. How many of you have heard of something called the Mirai botnet attack? Uh, just to keep you engaged, do you know of something called a DDoS? DDoS. DDoS is a dynamic denial of service. It's very simple. If you don't want Twitter's web page to work, you would ping the Twitter web page n number of times so that it only serves you, and hence it can't serve Shashank or it can't serve Babu. Do you know what is that n number of times to bring down a decent server? These number of packets would be millions and trillions of packets saying ping, ping, ping. Do a get request, do a get request. Imagine doing trillions of get requests to a web page. It would go down, right? Now tell me what would be able to trigger trillion get requests? Would your PC be able to do that? Would 10,000 Shashank standing in front of 10,000 PCs keep hitting enter? Even that wouldn't do trillions, right? So to scale something like that, smart hackers, what they did, they tried to control a lot of insecure IoT nodes out there. These are nodes which have vulnerabilities which are known. The attackers never exposed themselves. They kept on building an army of bots, right? And one fine day they would launch an attack, and sites would come down. This happened way back, years back. The Mirai botnet is still there. Governments keep on coming out with countermeasures to that, but hackers are smarter. So to counter that, there is a spec called the ISA-IEC 62443. The 62443 is perhaps industry's first concerted effort to really look at their products and say, this is how we add security, right? So you have different aspects to the spec: general, operation, integration, and development, out of which the development section has a very boring n number of pages talking about how you add security to the system. Right? So this is another very big macro trend shaping the next generation of gas turbines, nuclear power plants, wind turbines, solar power farms, etc. and etc. So maybe years down the line, India would have a 62443 compliant power farm coming up. So the spec defines something called security level 3 and 4. Although the spec has SL1 and 2, we see no one aiming for 1 and 2. No one likes to aim low. So everyone looks at 3 and 4. 3 and 4 kind of mandate having hardware protection in place, because there are some things you just cannot do without having dedicated hardware security in the system. I'll come to what hardware security is, but a hint for you is hardware security is not equal to cryptographic accelerators, okay? Let's talk a little bit about the standards and legislations. Again, these are terms you may have heard or seen in the newspaper somewhere, but just a refresher. How many of you have heard of GDPR? Obviously, NIST, of course, everyone knows what NIST is. NIST has formulated a spec called the 8259, which is cybersecurity IoT guidelines. Interestingly, there is a cybersecurity guideline document from India as well. India has something called the TEC. It's the telecommunications department of our government. That has something called a 31318. It talks about how do you implement security in an IoT device. As a person who is in the field, we are far away from doing what this spec says, but we are getting there. Australia has its own, Korea has its own. If one had to boil down all of these into, let's say, a set of vulnerabilities that are there, then this is what it looks like. You should ideally have no universal default passwords. By the way, the Mirai botnet made use of default passwords only. So there were systems that had usernames called admin, password was password. They have this large matrix, I think 52 or 53 elements in that. Usernames would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, admin 1, 2, 3. It's crazy. This is stuff you and I could do this over T, right? So hackers just did it way better. Keeping your software updated, securely storing credentials and sensitive data. Perhaps the most important part of the guidelines. Communicate securely, which basically means using something like TLS for your internet connectivity. Ensuring software integrity. Babu talked about something called the IDE, the integrity and data encryption. Right, so having integrity checks in your system is an absolute must. Minimizing the exposed attack surfaces, easier said than done. It's very difficult to minimize the attack surface if you're going to deploy n number of nodes in the market. And of course, ensuring that the personal data is protected. Otherwise, you kind of disobey the law of the land, especially in some countries. I talked about automotive, industrial, consumer IoT. Let's talk a little bit about what is very hot right now. What is very hot right now? What just happened recently? A very big event. 5G spectrum allocation. Everyone followed it? Right? So there was this news about how efficient the systems have become. The thing is, the telecom deployments are a huge, I'd say, a gold mine for an attacker, because traditionally systems have focused a lot on scaling, not on securing. These are some of the attacks that have happened successfully, and most of these have thankfully not happened in India. They have happened elsewhere. So system firmwares. Oh, sorry, I'm new to this. Very sorry. Yeah, so system firmware may be vulnerable to something called a rootkit or a bootkit attack. Let me tell you an interesting story, because I have 25 minutes and you don't want to rush out. How many of you know something called, or have heard about something called a grain of rice attack? Anyone? Right? Okay, let me give you some background. How many of you in the past or even today do some kind of board designing, circuit designing just for your hobby or no? Right. So basically, there is a process called a PCB design on which you place your components, you route them together, and when it's done, you are perhaps the happiest creature on the planet. Then you give it to someone for something called fabrication. And that party is very good at what they do, which is bringing your CAD design to life, give you physical boards. Now, the grain of rice chip attack was supposedly, so the term is supposedly because neither of the parties confirmed this. This happened in 90, I think way back. I don't know the year exactly. So what happened was an American company for data centers designed a new board. They gave this board to a fabricator in one of our neighbors, notorious for their malicious activities. It seems that that company which was fabricating was linked to the army, which is a hostile army to India as well. They modified the Gerbers. No one thinks of this. No one in their normal state of mind thinks about modifying Gerbers, because if there was some kind of integrity checks on the Gerbers, this would have been caught, right? But it seems they did not have it. They modified the Gerbers and added a very small chip. That's why it's called the grain of rice chip attack. This small chip added a single line to one of the flashes which was on board, NOR flash memory. This NOR flash memory incidentally had addresses to which the telecom data should go out. So your MAC and file level packets should go out. Right? Can you think of what it takes to do such an attack? It takes a brilliant understanding of design and of fabrication, and a lot of motivation and hate for the, for the company that you're doing this to. So these devices were deployed in the field for years. One fine day they got detected, and perhaps the biggest company on Earth in terms of revenue was one of the customers. They came back with a vengeance. The company that manufactures data centers lost 50% of their market cap in one trading session. 50%. It's crazy, right? So please do look it up. The reason why I don't take names is I'm representing an organization here. I don't want to take names and say this happened, but it's all supposedly. Also Google, chip of grain of rice attack with the word Bloomberg. So you have a very comprehensive coverage of what happened. They were the ones who broke the story, by the way. So this happened. This really happened, supposedly, right? So an attack on a firmware boot or an update can compromise the system. At least from what I know, not a lot of systems in India, telecom systems, the ones that let you video call with your puppy probably somewhere, they don't have any kind of secure firmware upgrade mechanism. A bin file gets uploaded to a server, then you do a file transfer using FTP, and it's as good as that. It's like sitting in a college intranet and downloading videos, right? That's what is happening in the field today. And it has led to a lot of compromises which have not been discovered for a very long time. Keeping pace with security advances has become challenging, but things are changing. And how they are changing is, there is something called an ORAN. Has anyone heard of ORAN? Can someone take a guess of what RAN means in 5G? It stands for radio access network, okay? Just trying to get you to talk, okay? So the radio access networks are basically the fundamental blocks in a 5G system. 5G is very different from any other cellular deployment. You have a lot of modularity. It's possible to now deploy something called private 5G networks. So you could have a private 5G network just for the Radisson Blue and give excellent connectivity, because I don't seem to be getting any connectivity in the rooms today, right? The spec clearly talks about doing secure boot using a hardware root of trust. A hardware root of trust is where stuff actually starts, where the journey of security starts in a system. And of course, it's up to you guys to do a very good job of it. The DV guys do the secure root of trust. And then that gets built upon by the first level firmware, which then gets built upon by the second level firmware, third level, and so on. So you have trusted software running. I also heard Babu talk about having a trusted enclave kind of implementation built on top of CXL. So they talk about implementing trusted software. So the most critical part of it, let's say some kind of signing operations that happen, or any operation where authentication is involved, saying that let me add this foreign node to the system, should happen within a trusted boundary. And end-to-end chain of trust with a secure boot update. This is a trend that's catching on across all industries, as you just saw, secure boot and firmware upgrade. And there is something very interesting. One more interesting story for you to take away. How many of you have these big giant printers in your offices? The ones that have a huge screen, a lot of buttons, right? Probably manufactured by popular Japanese brands, right? How many of you know that there has been a group of people who played a game called Doom on a printer? Right? Please do Google this as well. It's very interesting. And frankly, the attack was very simple. They attacked the boot up process. That's it. That processor is capable of executing a game. They just did not have the game there. So folks decided, fine, let me just add the game there. And so Doom is a very popular game. You can play it on PC, Raspberry Pi, whatever ports you have, right? The compute industry over the past few years has seen the proliferation of another spec. I'm sorry, I'm dropping a lot of specs at you. It's something called the NIST 800-193. And it is all about platform firmware resiliency. None of this is uncommon sense. All of this is very common. If you and I were to design a system, we would want to put it because we know what can happen. Unfortunately, it has to be explicitly said and certified because a lot of people were not doing it. So the PFR, the platform firmware resiliency, is all about protection, detection, and recovery. So protection is maintaining a state of integrity. Detecting is if that state of integrity is disturbed, you should be able to detect it successfully, and you should be able to recover from it. There is one more very interesting area where the NIST spec is getting proliferation, and that is in the power supplies of your servers. We have these server farms, deployed by AWS, by Microsoft Azure. Probably, if you're a big enough company, you would have a local server farm. The server farms generally have very high quality power supplies, and these power supplies are now seeing the application of 800-193. So a lot of security now being added to the dumb power block, right? That just gives power, that's all. And by the way, it does not even have connectivity, right? So security without having connectivity in place. So let me talk a little bit about what Microchip has been doing over the past 25 odd years to serve client security needs. So we have been doing security for a very long time, even before security was supposedly the, I don't want to say it on stage, let's go with the cool, okay? Before security was very cool. So back in late 90s, there was this ASIC that we did for IBM, which later became something called the TPM. How many of you have heard of TPM? A trusted platform module? Yeah, so it's a small IC that is probably a part of every laptop that has shipped at least for the last 10 years, 10 years, at least office PCs, and definitely been shipping out since the last 2 years because Windows 11 mandates TPM 2.0. Without that, the Windows BIOS does not even boot, right? There is no way. You would probably boot Ubuntu on it, but you won't be able to boot Windows on it. So then we also did the TPM 1.0, the 1.1, the revised spec. Then we released something called crypto memories. Crypto memories are basically memory storages which allow you to encrypt data on the fly. Very trivial stuff, but consider the fact that this was 2007. No one was even asking for it then, right? We were selling to guys who made refrigerators. That's all we did. Then came a turning point. Trivia. Do you know when the term IoT, Internet of Things, became popular? Rather, let me put it this way. When it was coined, when did someone, publicly say, hey, this is what is coming? The year was 2011. Some brainy scientist somewhere in the UK did it. I don't remember the name. But he coined the term IoT. And since then, IoT has been the buzzword of our industry. Recession-like conditions have come and gone. The pandemic has come and almost gone. We still see everyone talking about IoT. Everyone talking about, connecting it, this and that. We have Nike connecting shoes to your phones for God-forsaken reasons. Now, IoT needs security, and you can't sell a $5 chip to someone who is making a $2 sensor, right? So you need to be able to sell security, but at the right price with the right feature set so that you don't break the bank. At the same time, we make some profits out of it. So Microchip launched something called the crypto authentication portfolio. It's our bread and butter. It's frankly what pays my salary as well. Crypto authentication are small ICs that just do the job and nothing more. And then came the cloud, the cloud wave. How many of you have heard of something called AWS IoT, Microsoft Azure IoT, Google IoT, IBM's IoT, right? So all of these companies have realized that, hey, there is a trend going on. People want to connect stuff to the internet, but they probably don't know how to do it. Let us show them how to do it. So let's have Shashank design the hardware. Let us help him with an IoT backend that lets him see, temperature data, humidity data, and do stuff with it, right? So we kept up with the market. We realized that there are some specific requirements for, doing all of this connectivity to the cloud. And then came the wave. And off late, the latest and greatest thing is the automotive industry. I talked about the cheese spec. How many of you have seen or, in fact, own the Mahindra XUV 700? Or have heard about it, have seen the features? It has a nice, swanky, wireless charger, right? The industry is following it. So you see a lot of cars coming with it. You see a lot of coffee shops now having charging mats and so on and so forth. So we see charging thing picking up. I already talked about it. But what does security even mean? And this is perhaps going to be the last part where I talk a lot. At the end of the day, there are so many trends: automotive, industrial, consumer. Do you do something unique for each of them? We believe that the answer is no. Security is one of those things, it doesn't really matter where you're doing it. You're doing it on a PC, doing it on a microcontroller, doing it on a Linux machine, doing it on maybe an 8-bit MCU that, that has no memory footprint. We believe that the basics are same. It all starts with something called a hardware root of trust. This is something where the trust starts. It may be a simple key. It may be a root public key. It may be a serial number for all that I know, right? But something that is unique for each device, period, right? This enables the secure boot and secure upgrade process. Now, the secure boot and secure upgrade process can be made use of to detect counterfeits. And this is what we are doing. So Microchip, in fact, I personally am engaged very closely with India's biggest water purifier manufacturer. Now you may ask, why do you have security in water purifiers? How many of you own water purifiers at your homes? How many of you service them regularly, get them serviced? What is, let's say, a rough ballpark of an annual maintenance fee that you pay? 2,500, 3,000, 4,000, depending on the brand. How much did you purchase the actual unit for? 12K, 15K, this. So do you think they're making money, they're making profits, they're hiring people with expensive salaries from that 12K to 15K, or from the money that you're giving them every year? From the money that you're giving them every year, right? So they would want to protect that revenue. And to protect that revenue, they add counterfeit protection in their systems, right? So this is something that can be enabled using the root of trust. Now the same thing also enables secure connectivity. I did not factor that in my presentation today, but the TLS handshake is perhaps one of the most fascinating things you can do in communication. I say fascinating because there is just one way to do it rightly, and there are infinite ways to do it in a wrong way. And most of the attacks happen on one of those infinite ways to do it the wrong way. But if you have a root of trust in place, it becomes very simple to also do secure connectivity the right way. And then comes application layer security. So an application layer security can be something as simple as a application level handshake. So before I and you talk, we could have some kind of a hi hello saying that, hey, I am from this so and so. Babu did the so and so for me. He told you who I was and so on. So even in applications, we have that. When a service guy comes to, let's say, maintain your home inverter, he connects a weird looking cable into the system. He's actually sending some packets to check the firmware version and so and so. But you cannot do a strong implementation of this without this at the base, right? So the takeaway I want you to go away with from this room is, without the root of trust, almost every security use case is next to impossible, right? Now imagine a lot of systems in the field today, millions of them, don't follow this concept. What do you think is happening, right? Attacks are happening left, right, and center. This is probably the reason for that. We have been, supporting security use cases in a lot of product segments. So 8-bit MCUs, probably almost all of us in our college used those small 8-bit MCUs. Did you do some of those things? Okay, a lot of you are cool, fine. 8-bit MCUs, 16-bit MCUs, 32-bit MPUs running Linux, Ethernet, Wi-Fi, USB, blah, 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 all of these, right? Security has become a genuine use case in almost all embedded systems that are being made. And funnily enough, at the base of all of these is just 3 principles. I talked about the root of trust. The root of trust helps to implement just 3 principles. You do a good job of it, you're good to go. One is authentication, assuring that something is what it is declared to be. What if, ID card says Shashank, but on the stage came some joker, right? So some kind of authentication helped there. I'm not saying I'm not a joker, I'm saying could have come, okay? Second is integrity check. Again, referring to the ID thing that Babu mentioned. Integrity checks are perhaps the single most important things that should be a part of every subsystem, especially anything that communicates to any third party or your PC or your cloud or whatever it is. Integrity is just ensuring that the content has not changed. If the content has changed, you break the service then and there. That's all, right? No attacks go through. And confidentiality, which is the act of protecting the content from prying eyes. Let me just throw a question here, fine, okay? How many of you think that having confidentiality is extremely important, in fact, mandatory? Now, on the other side of the spectrum, how many of you think that it may be okay to not have confidentiality? No one? Let me give an example. If, let's say, I wanted to see how much water I have consumed in a day from my water purifier, would confidentiality be a mandatory feature there? Right? Now, if if 2 soldiers at the border are exchanging radio communication, talking about when they will be changing posts, would you want confidentiality there? Yes, right? So we strongly believe, why I ask this question is confidentiality is associated with a few cents, maybe a couple of dollars in some use cases. So sometimes it may not be very, very important. It all depends on something called a threat model. So, a lot of guys with fancy titles do something called a threat model, wherein they look at each and every system. They say, okay, this is my asset. These are the kind of threats that can compromise my asset. These are the kind of attacks that can realize a threat. These are the kind of risks associated if that attack goes through. And these are the countermeasures that I should have in place, right? So a lot of times confidentiality doesn't become the defining factor, but almost always authentication and integrity is, right? So 3 fundamental pillars, CIA, confidentiality, integrity, authentication. What has Microchip been doing? Well, we design ICs called secure elements. We do also call them HSM lights or HSMs, depending on the use cases that they are in. These are basically ICs that are capable of storing the key material. It doesn't do TLS. It doesn't do the most fancy crypto algorithm on earth. What it is good at is storing the key and generating the key using perhaps the best random number generator in the industry. These keys are generated inside, they are stored inside. The key can only be used, it never comes out, right? So once the key doesn't come out, you have no risk of compromising the key, virtually no risk of compromising the key. And when you don't compromise the key, you will be surprised at what kind of attacks can be avoided, right? So some good, we follow the good security practices of having all crypto primitives inside the device. Signatures, encryptions, hash calculations, everything happens within that chip. That chip itself is protected from any kind of, at least the known attacks today. So something called a voltage glitching attack, frequency glitching attack, temperature glitching attack. There's something called a side channel attack. Has anyone heard of side channel attack? Right? People looking at the power supply consumption, let's say someone is doing a parsing routine of a password, and they look at the power supply, they look for patterns in the power supply line, the VCC line, to know how long the password routine went on. They would then inject a new password. If it goes on longer, you know you're on the right path because 4 characters went through, 3 characters went through, and so on. Right? So these kind of attacks are happening and they're compromising crypto primitives today. We talked about having a unique root of trust. Microchip till date has shipped billions of secure ICs, secure elements, memories, and so on. Billions, in fact, tens of billions across the last 20 years. And each of these have unique serial numbers in the field today. You could pick up an IC, you could give it to us, and we could tell you when it was manufactured and where it was done, and so on and so forth, right? So traceability. In the previous session, someone talked about the act of traceability. Something at the application level is possible with the crypto element that we have. There is another very interesting feature, very limited use cases. There are something called an infusion pump. Has someone seen a morphine drip closely to their relatives in a hospital? Morphine drips basically require very controlled motor injection. If you go fast, you could end up killing the patient. If you don't go fast enough, the patient could experience a lot of pain. You would want that morphine drip motor to not be overused. And we have use cases in the field where after n number of uses, that motor goes out of service. You provide the same drive, you provide the same PWM signals, it doesn't work. So we have some security countermeasures for that. So yeah, in a nutshell, this is what we do. But is this the be all and end all? Does it help if you give a swordsman the best sword in the industry? Or a shooter the best gun in the industry? No, right? You need something else. In the case of the shooter, you have to give him training. In the case of a swordman, you have to give him training. In the case of secure ICs, you have to give the ability to do the secure key generation, right? We could give them the best IC and they could make a mess of it by storing keys in an Excel file on the production floor. It's as good as not doing any of it, right? So Microchip does not only provide hardware ICs, we also provide something called a key provisioning service. So if we have, one client giving us 3 projects, we have the ability to give them 3 different part numbers with 3 different types of keys within them. One for connecting to the cloud, one for doing something else, right? So these 2 things, the hardware IC and the key provisioning, is what makes IoT truly secure. And this is what is, the industry is looking at. We are probably far ahead of the pack today, but we see our competition catching up. The hardware and the services go together hand in hand. Otherwise, it's a bad deployment. That's what I like to tell my clients, and that's what I would tell you if you are looking at doing something like this in the future. All right, that's all I had. We have 2 minutes. Any questions? Yes. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question with the mic?
You had made a comment that security hardware is not just cryptographic accelerator. And I'm just trying to understand, is that by saying that you're alluding to the fact that beyond the cryptographic hardware goes the firmware and that building the chain of trust and all that? Is that what you meant there?
So let me put it this way. Does everyone need it? I would probably not say yes to that because the decision most of the times lies in the hands of the company. Having said that, let me put it this way. Any system that does not have hardware security today is becoming a potential pitfall for the future because we are now seeing attacks that no one even dreamt of. I'll give you an example. I took the example of water purifiers. There was this huge scam going on where recycled filters were being put back and put into people's systems. And there were some weird infections that started happening, unfortunately, in the northern part of India. It was traced back to this. So adding something like a counter actually helped there. So again, that company probably would not like the idea of putting that into billions of candles that they make, but putting it is going to protect them. That's what I would put it. One more, let me tell you, this is something that a lot of us would associate with. How many of you are aware of a petrol pump scam that happened a few years back? I think 2004 timeframe. In those systems, you used to have those Z systems. I don't know how many of you have seen them. No? So Z systems had a big segmented display, the one that would display the amount of petrol dispensed and so on. These displays would be interfaced over an I2C bus to a main host controller. That host controller would receive pulse signals from the dispenser, right? So if you dispense something, there is something that rotates very fast, no? That sends counter signals back to the main card. That main card would then do some computation and send over I2C. There were two kinds of attacks that were happening. One was changing the I2C traffic. So some smart people had figured out what kind of bits and bytes to send. And fortunately or unfortunately, we all like rounding up. So I have never gone to a petrol pump and said 72 rupees ka dena. You always say 100, 200. So their firmware, what it does is in multiples of 100, so 100, 200, 300, 400, they had put a multiplying factor in place. This is one attack. Second attack was they had replaced the firmware on the MCU in collusion with the manufacturers of the Z petrol pump to add a multiplying factor. So again, to answer your question, should it be a must? It's up to them to decide, but these things, have happened. You can't even dream of these things happening. So we strongly believe it should be their systems. Petrol pump is one more success story, by the way. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You
can stay here. You can stay.
You mentioned the best in class, the random number generator.
Yes.
May I know what kind of random number is it? Because there are class of random numbers, right?
Oh, yes. Okay. So let me put it more correctly. We made our random number generator complies with a very stringent spec that exists today. It's certified against something called the NIST 800, Chapter 90, A, B, and C. So A talks about the quality of the number, B talks about the quality of the source, and C also talks about one of these. I think it's a combination of these two. 10 years back, there was a spec called the 800-22, which was the most stringent at that time, but now it's this one. And our random number generators have been certified against it even before the spec was finalized, frankly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.